Welcome to the Mentors and Moguls podcast. I'm your host, Heather Stone. I bring you mentors and moguls from all around the world, different walks of life, from creatives to CEOs to business leaders to top athletes and all kinds of other people in between. Today, we're talking about fear. Yes, we all have it in some way, shape, or form. Fear can hold us back from living the life we really desire. I've got a wonderful guest here today that has actually created a film series on fear. Mr. Bill Bennett. He is a writer, producer, director of feature films and documentaries. His career spans 30 years, and he's made 16 feature films, 4 dramatized documentaries, and 5 feature-length documentaries. Welcome, Bill. I'm very happy that you are on the show today, and I'm very happy to be talking about this subject. I was introduced to you by a mutual friend, and she spoke very highly of you. And first, I watched your movie, which was PGS, the movie. I want you to talk a little bit about that, and then I'd love to segue into your latest project, which is Facing Fear. So tell me, how did you come upon making PGS the movie? And I'll let you share with the audience what the subject matter of that is.
Okay. PGS stands for Personal Guidance System. It's a bit of a play on GPS, but Personal Guidance System, I contend in this movie, is in fact your intuitive system. Your intuitive system guides you, helps protect you. And what I say in the movie is that it is a legitimate system, as legitimate as your circulatory system or your nervous system. It's just that it works energetically. And because of that, science has a bit of difficulty measuring it, quantifying it, finding it, even though Eastern medicine has worked with the body's energetic system for millennia. And the way this started off, it's a very, very weird story. And I got to say, and I'll say this at the outset, I came from a very evidence-based background. Both my parents were dentists. I, in fact, started off, once I finished high school, I went to med school in Australia, and I was doing medicine. I got partway through the med school and realised that it wasn't for me, and I flipped across to an arts law course and found my way into journalism and then into documentaries and then into feature films. But basically, I came from very much of an evidence-based background. But here I am in New Orleans about 11 years ago now, and I'm making a movie, a big thriller with big stars. So I have to go to a casting session in Los Angeles very early in the morning. So I'm in my car, my rental car, driving to the airport. I woke up a bit late, so I'm running late for the flight. It's before dawn. It's the first flight out. It's all dark. There's absolutely no cars on the road. And I'm approaching this intersection. There's a green light up ahead. I go to accelerate to make sure that I get through on the green, because the last thing I want to do is be stopped by a stupid red light, when I'm running late for the flight. I go to accelerate and I hear a voice, and the voice says, "Slow down." My first reaction is, I haven't had enough coffee. This is weird. What is this? So I just dismiss it. I go once again to accelerate to make sure that I get through on the green light. The voice says a second time, but much more emphatically, "Slow down." I go, this is just too weird. I slow down. And then out of nowhere, a huge truck runs the red light on the cross street on my right, barrels through this intersection. I slam on the brakes now. The truck just narrowly misses me. I get to the other side of the intersection. I got to pull over. I'm absolutely shaking and full of adrenaline. And had that voice not come in, had I not listened to that voice and acted on it, that truck would have hit me. It would have killed me. I have absolutely no doubt.
Wow.
Anyway, so I got to the airport. I got my flight. I'm in the early stages of doing this movie, and I get too busy to really think much about it. But over the years, it came back to me, this image of this truck narrowly missing me and this voice. And I started to ask myself 3 fundamental questions. What was that voice? Where did it come from? And why did it save my life? Mm-hmm. And those were the 3 questions really that launched me into the film. It took me a long time to make the film. I've been quite successful at getting films up prior to that. But this one, no one wanted to back it. It was really strange because what's intuition? How do you make a film on intuition? like I say, I came from a very much evidence-based journalistic background, but I wanted to make this film in an unusual way in that I wanted to keep an open mind. I didn't want to approach it necessarily from a, like a BBC knowledge kind of point of view, where you got balanced sides and everything. I mean, I started off with the premise that intuition exists because it saved my life. So I'm going to start off with that premise. Intuition exists. Now, how does it work? Why does it work? Why do we have it? And those were the things really that propelled me through the film. But I couldn't get this movie made, and I was at the point of giving up, and then I had a dream, and that changed everything.
So this is fascinating because obviously you had something shocking to get your attention. You
Yeah.
had a little bit of a shift of course once you could stop and take a breath and really think about it. And then when you need a little more nudging, you had something else that, of course, wasn't evidence-based. You had a dream. So
Yeah.
you had that dream. Did you think, okay, obviously you were compelled. You were compelled to make this film, and maybe you weren't sure why. Did that kind of play back into the intuition to say, all right, now I've really got to chase this down?
Well, so what happened was this. I got to the point where literally for about 8 years, I've been trying to get this film up. I'd gone to film markets. I'd talked to distributors, financiers, sales agents, everybody. Everybody said, yeah, look, it kind of might be interesting, but there's no precedent for it. We can't back it. So I got to the point of almost giving up. I remember going to sleep one night, and just before bed, I said to myself, right, I've got to make a decision in the morning. Do I keep on banging my head against the wall and proceed with this, or do I just put it down to an interesting experiment and walk away and go back to what I was normally doing, which was like thrillers and romantic comedies and so forth? And during the night, I had this dream. And in this dream, basically what this dream told me is that I had to make the film. I had to nickel and dime it and start immediately. And that I shouldn't wait for the budget and the crews that I was normally, sort of making movies with. I just had to go out and like jerry-rig it and just do it. Okay. I woke up like this, like almost like a cliche, where you wake up in bed, your eyes open like this.
Right.
And the message from the stream was very, very clear. And I looked across at the bedside clock, and it was 4:44 in the morning. And I thought, okay, that's weird. Now, I didn't really know much about numerology at that point, but I knew enough to think, okay, so I've had this very, very clear directive in this dream, and now it's 4:44 in the morning. What do I do? So I had my iPad by my bedside, and I Googled, what does 4:44 mean? And up came about 4 or 5 entries. And I remember reading one entry from Doreen Virtue. And basically what it said was this. It said 4:44 is a powerful angelic number telling you that right at this moment you are surrounded by angels, archangels, and spirit guides. They're commending you for the work that you've done so far, and they're saying you have to move forward, you have to complete your endeavor. And if you trust your inner wisdom and your inner guidance, they will guide you and they will protect you, and everything will work out to great success. Okay. So it's like July, and in Australia, it's the middle of winter, and I'm lying in bed reading this on the iPad, right? And I've just had this very, very clear directive from the dream, and now this thing comes up on Google telling me that I'm surrounded by archangels and spirit guides telling me that I've got to move forward. And I think, bloody hell, what do I do? Because like at that point, I didn't believe in spirit guides and angels or anything like that. I didn't believe in that stuff. But I knew, and it's really, really interesting, Heather, I knew that this was kind of like a crunch moment. I instinctively knew that this was like a pivotal moment in my life. I had to make a decision. What do I do? I mean, do I believe the dream? Do I believe that I am actually surrounded by, this angelic realm, and that they're telling me that I've got to move forward and that they'll protect me? Or do I just put it down to something crazy, kind of a nutsoid coincidence that I have this dream and I wake up at that time and just forget about it, and I just move on with my life and I just forget about this stupid film? I decided that it was just too much of a coincidence, and so I went back to sleep. When I woke up, I ordered a camera and some sound gear and some lighting gear. I booked flights to India because I figured that was the best place to start a film on intuition. And with my wife's approval, we pulled some money out of our savings and we began the film. And that's how it started.
So you had to, in essence, trust your intuition and be tested and trusted again. That was part of your journey to make the film, to talk about what it was.
Yeah. I mean, look, if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't had that dream, if I hadn't woken up at 4:44, if I hadn't found out what 4:44 meant, I wouldn't have made that film. And my life would be totally different because making that film changed my life.
So that was, in essence, the buttons, the catalyst and the buttons that needed to be pressed in your life to move you to action, to make you pay attention, to shift.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think we all have moments like that, but whether we choose to follow up on them and listen to them and take action is completely different. So I commend you for doing that. Are you happy once now that you made that decision? How long did it take you to realize that, okay, I'm definitely on the right track? Did you need more evidence to show you that keep going?
Yeah. A lot of very, very strange things happen. And to answer your question directly, yes, having made that decision and having made that film, my life has changed fundamentally. I mean,
wow.
I now look at my life pre that and post that. I mean, it's been that much a fundamental shift. But it wasn't easy, and it actually wasn't immediate. It took a long time, and it took a lot of fear to overcome, because essentially what I discovered through the making of the film is that I discovered this spiritual side to life that I hadn't ever really considered before. My wife was spiritual, and I used to laugh at her. And she'd walk around listening to these crazy podcasts and, and read these books that were just absolutely nonsensical to me. And I went, oh, well, okay, that's her life. That's not my life. But like I say, I mean, that's from that point on, that film took then four years to make. I ended up with a budget of 1.5 million from investors that came in and backed me. So from starting with no budget and just putting in some savings, people then came on, saw what I was doing and backed me. I know the film has had a profound effect on a lot of people since then, but it's also had a profound effect on me. It's changed me fundamentally. And I'm just thankful that it has.
Well, I recommend it. We'll put the links in for everyone to go and link up and find your film at the end of this podcast down below. I personally was very moved, and I think we spoke about this. I reached out to you. I can't say enough good things. I think that the timing was excellent. I mean, when everyone discovers this, I think they discover it when they need it, when they're ready to digest it. But I do think that the timing, especially with the big shift, with the world kind of resetting or locking down, whatever you want to say about it, I think it's a big shift in our thinking and our priorities, perhaps, is a perfect time for me to watch it and kind of be reminded of some important things in life that I had pushed aside, because everyone gives their opinion, but everyone has great insights. And it's not rocket science, but it's all very thoughtful and very deep. So I thank you very much for sharing that with everyone. And like I said, we'll have a link so everyone else can see this as well. You mentioned fear and facing fear. So let's kind of segue into your current project. I know you've got many, but one current project is the next documentary of Facing Fear. Can you tell us, how did that part come about, and why did you decide, okay, I did this one, now let's jump into Facing Fear and tackle that subject?
Basically what happened, Heather, was that while I was making the film on intuition, I discovered that the biggest blockage to intuition is fear. Mm-hmm. And I started to think about that and started to think, what is fear? How does it work? Do we really need fear? Can we take fear that at times can cripple us and reimagine that in a way that, in fact, aids to our growth and our betterment? And that really was the start of it. And then the pandemic came. So I'd actually started the movie, and I'd shot something like about 50 hours of material all throughout the States and elsewhere. And then the pandemic hit, and I looked around and I just saw the world in a state of fear, such as we hadn't seen in a long, long time. And so where I'm at the moment is I'm editing, and fingers crossed, if everything comes into alignment, the film will be finished towards the second half of next year.
I believe it will. You're making it for a reason. I believe it will, for sure.
Yeah.
So were you quite fearful when the pandemic hit? And did you tap into maybe some of the advice or some of the tools or some of the solutions or thought processes that you got from the interviews that you had done so far to kind of say, okay, this is how I'm going to pivot. I'm going to keep going with this film. Could you apply anything that you had learned from all of these great thought leaders?
It's a really good question. I did. And one of the fundamental things that I learned from the interviews that I've done, and I've done interviews with people like Dr. Bruce Lipton, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Paul Selig, Dr. Richard Schwartz, and a number of very, very highly, like world experts on fear, if you like.
Right.
Dr. Lisa Rankin, who wrote a best-selling book called The Fear Cure, talks about two types of fear: true fear, being survival fear, and false fear, being imagined fear. And it was interesting. So I started to look at the pandemic in those terms. Is this true fear, survival fear? How much of it is true fear? How much of it is imagined fear, that is promulgated by the media and all of that? And I got to say, in the early stages of the pandemic, because there were so many factors that were unknown, fear was rampant. It was rampant worldwide. And I have to admit that I tapped into that as well. It's interesting. One of the things that comes across in the interviews that I've done is that fear of the unknown is one of the biggest fears that we have. And that's why so many people fear death, because to many people, death is unknown. And when the pandemic hit, there were so many things that were unknown about it. Science then began to start, more things became known. I got to say, Heather, there's a mixture in the interviews. There's a mixture of practical advice and there's a mixture of esoteric advice. But one of the practical advices was, when you're faced with a situation of fear, plan. Know what your backstop is, know what your worst case scenario is, and plan for it. So I plan.
Well, I liked something that James Van Praagh had said in his interview. And of course, he deals with death. He deals with people that are fearful of death, don't understand it, want to understand it, so forth and so on. And I've always heard that you make decisions based on fear or based on love. There's nothing else. And then you've got another gentleman, I think it was Paul Selig, the channeler, right? And he's talking a little bit about vibrational fear. Basically, fear is a low vibration. And if you want to lift out of that, you need to raise your vibration. Again, I'm crudely summarizing this. But I thought it was very interesting how they seem to have a very clear handle on exactly what fear was, when all the rest of us are running around like chickens with our head cut off, and we're victims of the latest crisis that's being shoved in our faces the minute we turn on the television or any media platform. It's alert, news alert. You have to be sucked into this crisis. And then fear promotes fear. So as you went around and spoke to all of these people, was there anything that was an aha moment or very profound that you've never heard before that really stuck with you to get you through maybe the pandemic or a fearful situation in the last year?
We're editing at the moment, and I'm going through the interviews in minute detail. One of the interviewees that I looked at this week, and one of the things the film will be discussing is this notion there's either fear or love.
Right.
This interviewee said, no, that's wrong. There's fear and love. And you can't really understand fear unless you really understand love, and vice versa. And I thought, that's really interesting. One of the things that comes through really quite strongly throughout all of the interviews is that fear must be seen not as something that demonizes you, but something that gives you the opportunity to learn and grow. And so for that to happen, you have to not run away from fear, but in fact face your fears, which is why I've titled the film Facing Fear. And be really quite brave in facing the fear and looking at it. Dr. Richard Schwartz is this world-famous psychologist. He has developed a system called the internal family systems. And what he says is you've got to befriend your fear. And he, in fact, takes it to a level where you've got to find the fear in your body, and then you've got to personalize that fear. Give it a name. Call it Fred. Good morning, Fred. What are you here to teach me about today? Oh, I don't have enough money in the bank. All right, Fred, what's your advice? What should I do? And this system that he has developed has become clinically used by psychologists all around the world. But I said, so what? You paint a moustache on fear and you give him a funny little hat and, put him in a waistcoat? He said, yeah, absolutely. And he says in the morning what he does, he calls them parts. So you might have a fear of abandonment. You might have a fear of what people think of you. So you've got separate types of fear. And each type of fear has something to contribute, something to teach you. Invariably, he says this comes from childhood, parenting, something that happened to you in childhood. But these fears are there to help you grow and help you learn.
Just to digress a little bit, and I don't know if you've addressed this or not, or perhaps you're about to. When you were just talking about fear of being loved or fear of, I think about something I wrote down when I was watching this was fear of acceptance. I think with the age of social media, when you've got everything from, the Facebook, the TikTok, Instagram, anything that Twitter, I think is, wow, that could really mess you up. There's so much hate and fear going on that platform. The fear of a younger generation, because they've had this in their face since a young age, their formative years, the fear of not being accepted, I think not being good enough by total strangers because they don't have enough likes or followers, or they don't have the images up there, whether they're real or not, that they're living, their best life, rock star life at 13. Did anyone address that kind of fear? And what would you categorize that as?
One of the people that I interview is Reverend Zoe Inman, and she says, she talks about people bowing down to the golden calf of acceptance of what people think of you. She says it's one of the most pernicious fears that we currently have. And basically what she says, and what a lot of other people say, is that at the root of that is that you don't know who you really are. And once you do the work to find out who you really are, you've got a rock solid foundation then, and this stuff just bounces off you. It doesn't matter anymore. You don't need acceptance from other people then to have self-esteem. You have self-esteem because you know who you really are. And that's of huge value.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. I'll have to go listen to that interview. I definitely will. So does anything stand out to you that I know you ask a great question in your review. Don't want to give away too much, talking about, a single mother losing her job and what does she do first? Is there any answer that you liked the most, or that you understood the most, or related to the most, or anything that stood out there?
Yeah, so what I did, of all the people that I interviewed, one of the questions that I ask is, you've got a single mother, she's got a couple of kids, she's got very little savings, she's lost her job, and she is suddenly hit with a whole lot of fear. What advice would you give her? So I wanted to place that question in the film because we can talk about fear in a whole bunch of different terms, in terms of biology, fear being in the field and all of this sort of thing. But when it comes down to it, a practical question like that, I think, is really important. And I got a variety of different answers, but the commonality was stop. First off, just stop. One of the things that Bruce Lipton talks about is fear makes you dumb. Now, what he says is this: when fear hits you, you have the fight or flight response. So this comes back to our evolution, where we needed adrenaline, we needed these chemicals to course through our body so that we could run fast from the tiger that's jumped out of the cave from it, trying to attack us. So, but this still applies now. So instead of the tiger jumping at us, we've got, oh, I don't have a job anymore. So the fight or flight response is the same as that primitive response we had there. And what happens then is that the body pumps these chemicals through our system to the extremities so that we can either fight the tiger or we can run from it. But in the process of doing that, blood actually shifts from the brain. So we lose our capacity to think correctly. I mean, what Bruce Lipton says is when you're running from the tiger, you don't want to have your brain working out mathematical formula. What you want to do is you want to have your whole system geared towards getting the hell out of there.
Right.
So what happens is that you kind of freeze and you lose the capacity to intellectually think through an argument or think through a problem. And so what a number of the people have said is that you've got to break that cycle. Lee Carroll, who channels for Cryon, talks about what he calls the 3-second rule. He says, when you're faced with, something that scares the pants off you, just give it 3 seconds and allow the fear just to run through you, run its course, so that you can then get blood back into your cognitive part of your brain so that you can think through a solution. But a number of people talk about this in terms of finding that stillness so that a creative solution can come through. A number of people talk about, and I know this from my own situation, Heather, and I'm sure you probably do as well. Something awful happens to you in your life and you think, oh my God, this is a disaster. I've lost my job. I've lost my house. My partner's just walked out on me, or something like that. 5 years later, you look back on it and you think, oh, thank God that happened.
Yes.
That was the best thing. That was the best thing that could have happened to me. But at the time, of course, you can't think that way. Right. You don't even consider that. You think, oh my God, my partner's walked out. Nobody loves me. I'm never going to be loved again. I'm going to be, sleeping in a cardboard box under a bridge and all of this. So, yeah. So what the film does is it gives a selection of these different points of view. And in the process, I think it covers it pretty well. Yeah.
It's interesting that a few people alluded to the fact that fear, so if you focus on fear, you focus on all of the negative things that are happening around you, negative things that are happening in the world, on the news, wherever, and you're kind of a victim of that shock media, fear kind of begets more fear, attracts more fear. Do you believe that?
I do believe that, yeah. It's one of the key questions that I ask a lot of people. And a lot of the interviewees say, well, flip that. Joy attracts more joy. So, some people talk about the law of attraction, and fear works this way. Paul Selig says fear is a lie. And the purpose of fear is as you say, to beget more fear. And you know it yourself. You can get into an absolute spiral, when something happens and suddenly, oh my God, that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen, that's going to happen. But, one of the things that I've discovered is that fear lives either historically or in the future. It doesn't live in the present moment. So regret is a form of fear. Regret is a fear that lives in the past. Anxiety is a fear that lives in the future.
Yes.
But no fear actually lives in the present moment. And if we can find that a mechanism to stay in that present moment, we can obviate fear. Interesting thought, isn't it?
It's a very interesting thought. It's one, on a side note, it's one that I've battled. So I've had a fear of heights. And, I used to be able to go up into a building and I couldn't get close to the window and look out. I would just have to stay back. Even though I knew I was safe, I didn't really, something in my brain told me that was scary. Don't do that. And I've done several crazy things, climbed mountains and gone up in jets and whatnot. And just this year, I have broken through that, and now I'm sort of a daredevil. And I'm somehow either shocked my system or rationalized it, or I'm not quite sure what. But I recently went on a trek with some friends, and there was an obstacle course. And everyone was terrified to go to the second tier. And I couldn't wait to get to the third or the fourth, the higher up, the better. And they said, do you realize that you're like running towards everything you used to be afraid of? So there is hope that you can break through fear. I'm not quite sure how it works. Changing your perspective. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The fear you have of heights is a true fear in that it is a survival fear.
Right.
If you get too close to the edge of a building or a cliff or whatever, you have a mechanism that wants to protect you from overbalancing. That's a survival fear. It's a true fear.
Okay.
But I suspect what happened is that you went one step further and your fear became a phobia.
Yep.
So it became not so much a survival fear, but an irrational fear. You flipped from going from true fear into a false fear.
Yes.
So what you needed to do was you needed to flip it back from being a false fear, a phobia, into a true survival fear. And you managed to do that. Yeah.
Maybe through evidence of not falling off the terrible places that I was. I don't know. Not quite sure.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt that looking at fear rationally. I mean, a couple of the people in the film talk about actually finding fear in your body and actually taking it out and looking at it and examining it and looking at it from various perspectives. I mean, truly facing your fear and looking at it as something that, okay, so that's what you're trying to teach me. That's what I can get from it. And then they put it back. This idea that you can rid yourself of fear, a lot of people in the film say, you don't want to do that. I mean, you actually don't want to rid yourself of fear. You certainly don't want to rid yourself from survival fear because you're going to have a very short lifespan.
Right.
But these so-called false fears have legitimacy as well. Each of them in some way is there to warn you about something. And what you need to do is just understand that fear has a purpose. And once you extract that purpose, the fear loses its potency, it loses its toxicity, and it then becomes an agent for change and transformation.
Yeah, then you have, so what you call, a lot of people have, they get stuck, but they're afraid to try new things. And that's one of the things that I always talk about is you need to break out of your comfort zone, try something new, a little bit scary. It doesn't have to be a physical thing, but they're afraid to fail in some way, shape, or form. Is that a real fear or is that a self-imposed fear? And is that easy to overcome according to your experts?
Fear of change is one of the fundamental fears that we have. And fear of change can manifest in a number of ways that are actually really quite dangerous societally. I mean, racism is a fear of change. Homophobia is a fear of change. When they're all sort of paired back and back and back, it comes down to a fear of change. And oftentimes fear of change is linked to a fear of loss, a loss of status, a loss of abundance, a loss of a sense of place, and that sort of thing. I mean, I've asked a lot of people in the film about fear of failure, but I'm more interested in the flip side of that, and that is the fear of success.
Yes, well, that is a real issue as well. Some people are afraid to try; they don't want to succeed.
Yeah, exactly, and that once again comes down to a fear of a low self-esteem. I don't deserve this success. I've come from a small country town. How can I be doing these things? I'm not worthy to be in this person's company. These sort of things, which ultimately come back, pair back to something that perhaps that was an event in childhood, some issue with parenting or, I'll tell you something. So when I was like 6 years old, I went to primary school, and it was my first day of primary school. That's what we call in Australia. I'm not sure what it's called in America, but it's like grade 1, right?
Yes, yes.
And it was a bit daunting for me. I've got to say, it was very, very daunting for me. I hadn't gone to kindergarten or anything like this. It was the first time that I'd sort of, been left home and gone to school. So it's the first day in grade 1 of primary school. And the first class was a painting class. And so we were given some paper and paints and so forth. And I was told to paint something that whatever I want to do, I just paint something. So I painted an undersea grotto with a fish. And then I thought it was a pretty good fish. I thought, I thought I'd done a pretty good job. So the teacher comes up and leans over my shoulder. I'll never, ever forget this, and says, "What's that?" And I say, "It's a fish." And she says, "Doesn't look like a fish." Then she walks off. And I was shattered.
Wow.
I was shattered. And, I tell you what, I could have probably been, ended up, like Jackson Pollock or something like that. My whole artistic life from that moment on was cruel. It stopped stone dead because of that one comment that teacher made.
Wow.
That doesn't look like a fish. And then she just walked off. And it devastated me. I'm not joking. It devastated me. And I didn't want to do any kind of drawing or painting ever since. Now, I'm a film director, right? So one of the things that we do is storyboards. I can't storyboard.
Oh, you're kidding.
Eh?
You need to.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to face that fear and take that on as a new challenge.
Yeah, well, what's that Pixar movie with all those fish? I could never do that because I couldn't draw a fish.
Yes, that's tough because that left a big imprint on you.
But you see, this happens all the time. And, particularly when we're young and in our formative years, particularly things that authority figures say to us, have a big impact.
Yes.
And that teacher would have walked off absolutely, totally unaware that she had said something that had such a profound impact on me. And I'm not joking when I say that from that moment on, I had no interest in painting or drawing or anything of that kind of visual artistic nature.
That's very unfortunate. I think you should revisit that. Of course, you're a very creative guy, so it's ironic that you came out with a very creative and successful career despite that phobia, right?
Well, I picked up a camera, and I started taking photos. But I guess my point is this, and that is that a lot of the fears and limitations and barriers that we have in our life come back to these small, inconsequential things, really,
yes,
that happen to us in our formative years.
Yes.
And they live, they sit deep. And so you have people with low self-esteem, because somebody made a comment to you one day in the bathroom in a toilet block at school.
Right.
So we've got to dig back and find these things and face them and go, no, hey, you didn't see it as a fish, but I did.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you bring up a good point because a lot of our fears, if they're imagined or if they're actually real, like you say, survival, a lot of our fears do stem from some experience somewhere. And just depends on what we do with those. So this film, I actually think, and I'd love your thoughts on this, the purpose of your film is to help people maybe use it as a resource to kind of pick up some tools to deal with fear, whatever level they have, and move forward. I'm asking if that was your intent or what was your intent with this film?
Yeah. The films that I make very selfishly. And I make them selfishly insofar as I want to know all about that subject. For instance, I didn't have a clue what intuition was when I started that film. I couldn't find a definition. I looked everywhere. I looked in dictionaries. I looked in these really successful sort of how-to books, I looked everywhere. I couldn't find a definition of intuition. And so I came up with my own definition. And that is, intuition is a sudden unexplained insight that comes without intellect, expertise, or knowledge, something like that. Basically, with this film, I didn't know what fear was, and I wanted to really understand fear. But then when I started to think about it, there's no point making a film about fear without using it to give people tools and keys so that they can use fear for growth and learning. So that they're not moribund with fear, they're not encaged by fear. They can understand fear, understand where it's coming from, understand what its purpose is, and then lean into it and use it then so they can live better, more enriched lives. That's really the purpose of it.
Which is really a gift to anybody that has the chance to watch your films. You're giving a gift. So you think it's being selfish, and I think it's being incredibly compassionate. And so I thank you for that. I read somewhere that you had kind of a little acronym, the 5 F's of fear. Can you explain what those might be?
With intuition, I had 5 steps for intuition. Stop, listen, ask, trust, follow. With this, it's find your fear, feel your fear, face your fear, friend your fear, and free your fear. So what the film will go through is this process of finding, feeling your fear, facing it. Crucial one is befriending it, which is, some people will find difficult, but there will be ways, the film will explain ways how you can befriend your fear, and then free it. Don't get rid of it, but free it. Allow it to do its job. And its job really is as a warning system to alert you to things that need change in your life.
Fascinating. Well, on that note, without giving away any more of this fantastic film, they're both films. I will have the links up, but is there any parting words that you would like to share with the audience about maybe your next project or these projects, or how you hope it'll make them feel?
Well, first off, thanks for this opportunity. It's amazing to talk to you. So
I appreciate it.
I'm sort of absorbed right at the moment in this editing, and I'm looking at fear from a whole bunch of different angles. But I guess the most important thing is that people need to revisit fear in a different kind of way. They need to reimagine it in a different kind of way, to not cower to fear, to see it as something, as a very, very useful part of your armament, really, in how you deal with life. People talk about the media exacerbating fear and so forth. They bloody well do.
Yes.
I mean, so you got to be discriminating. I'm not saying don't watch the news, because I'm a news addict, but I'm very discriminating. And I go, no, I don't need to see that particular story that particular way. I would like to do 5 films in this series, intuition being the first, fear being the second, the third being the veil, which looks at what happens once passed through the veil into death. The fourth being hope. I'd love to do a film on hope. And the last one being a film on purpose, because one of the things that we struggle with in our life is, what is our purpose? Why are we here? I'd really like to examine that. So, but like I say, look, this is for myself. I'm really curious about all this stuff. And if other people get something from it, well, that's a bonus.
I think they will. And again, I thank you on behalf of everyone that I've shared this with. They all love it and they all want more. So please continue making these films and exploring these subjects, because I think they're very, very personal to people. They're important. And this is good stuff that you're putting out there. And it's great stuff. And you're actually helping a lot of people, whether you realize it or not, or hear from people or not. I really do think you are.
Thank you.
Can't wait to see what you do next.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Mentors and Moguls podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, rate and review this interview and share it with a friend who could benefit from today's guest.
You can find bonus video episodes at mentorsandmogulspodcast.com or check out our events page and our blog at heatherrstone.com. Until next time, make it a great day.